Hey, 42 here. Every year, 10 million Americans and 275,000 Britons mysteriously go missing. But can someone literally vanish into thin air? Science tells us no, but there have been many stories that say otherwise. One of the most bizarre of these is the legend of David Lang. David Lang and his family lived on a farm near Gallatin, Tennessee, in the United States. In September 1880, David Lang's two children, Sarah and George, were playing in the front yard of their family home. Their parents, David and Emma, came out of the house into the garden. David headed off into the field towards his horses. At the same time, a buggy carrying August Peck was approaching, a friend of the family. David turned to walk back to the house and waved to the judge. A few seconds later, in clear view of his entire family and the judge, David Lang disappeared in mid-step. Emma screamed and everyone rushed towards the spot, thinking he had fallen into a hole. But there was no hole. They searched everywhere, but David wasn't to be found. A few months later, the children noticed the spot where their father had vanished turned yellow and wilted in a circle 4.6 meters in diameter. Several months later, Lang's children heard their father's voice calling out for help as they played near the spot, but eventually his voice faded away and they never heard it again. From humble farmers to lords, Richard John Bingham, the 7th Earl of Lucan, popularly known as Lord Lucan, disappeared without a trace on the 8th of November 1974, after he murdered his children's nanny in the basement of the Lucan's family home in London by bludgeoning her to death. He fled and was never seen again. The authorities believed he drowned himself in the English Channel. However, there have been numerous sightings of him around the world, mainly in Africa. An ex-detective, Duncan McLaughlin, says he's collected sufficient evidence to prove that Lord Lucan in fact fled to Goa in Western India. A former drug dealer named Mark Winch handed photographs to the ex-detective of an elderly man taken in 1991 that showed an unmistakable likeness to Lord Lucan. Mark Winch also explained to the detective how he had become friendly with the man in the photographs whilst in Goa. He said how the man was a well-spoken gambler who loved to play backgammon, a game which Lord Lucan was famous for. A single disappearance not enough for you? How about the disappearance of an entire army battalion? In 1915, during World War I, 3 members of a New Zealand field company said they watched from a clear vantage point as a large battalion of the Norfolk Regiment marched up a hillside in Suvla Bay, Turkey. The hill was shrouded by a low-lying cloud. Nevertheless, the soldiers marched into the cloud without hesitation. They never came out. When the war ended, presuming the battalion had been captured and held prisoner, the British government demanded that Turkey return them. However, the Turks insisted the soldiers hadn't been captured, and they had never so much as made contact with the battalion. If a whole battalion isn't enough for you, how about an entire village of 2,000 people disappearing into thin air? In November 1930, a fur trapper named Joe LaBelle travelled to an Eskimo village on the shores of Lake Anjikuni in northern Canada. Joe was very familiar with the village. He knew it had a thriving fishing community of about 2,000 residents. However, this time, when he arrived, the village was completely deserted. He found one fire still ablaze, on which there was a pot of blackened stew. When the authorities investigated, their findings were rather disturbing. No footprints of any of the residents were found. How did they vacate the village without leaving footprints? All of the Eskimo sled dogs were found buried under a 12-foot snowdrift. They had all starved to death. All of the residents' food and provisions were found undisturbed in their huts, as if nothing had happened. But there was one last, terrifically unnerving discovery. All the Eskimos' ancestral graves had been emptied. Creepy stuff. But just as spine-tingling is the mysterious Stonehenge disappearance in August 1971. One night, a group of hippies decided to pitch tents in the centre of the stone circle, and spend the night. They built a campfire and smoked a few joints of weed. At 2 AM, a powerful thunderstorm quickly encroached upon the Salisbury Plain, home to Stonehenge. Lightning ravaged the area. 2 witnesses, a policeman and a farmer, reported that the stones of the ancient monument lit up with an eerie blue light that was so intense they had to avert their eyes. They heard screams from the campers, and the 2 onlookers rushed to the scene, expecting to find injured bodies, but they found no one. The hippies had vanished. All that remained were several smouldering tent pegs and a drowned out campfire. Thanks for watching, until next time.